So I would like to just say a few things. First of all, thanks. We have a variety of people here to watch, to observe. So thanks. We have members of the administration. Thank you for you folks being here and allowing us to do this. A couple of our teaching staff is here as well. Mrs. Warner's in the back assisting with tech support items as well. Over yonder, I don't know if you can see her, but she's over there. Mrs. Lundquist, she's our librarian. She's also one of our big tech people. She's wandering there.
There you are. Hi, Ben. Hello.
And then we have somebody from the Post Journal here, Jordan, yes? Jordan back yonder. I don't know if you can see him, but he's over there. You just have to trust me. And then we have from Jamestown Community College, we have Mr. Ricchetti, who's over yonder, incognito as he chooses to be. Most importantly, the reason for us to be here, we have our 25 students in our Jamestown Community College 1530 class. I present to you author of the book that we're reading, Eager, Mr. Ben Goldfarb. I know it's, in case you guys forgot, he's 3 hours behind. Yeah. So it's actually, what is it, 7:30?
It's 7:30, yeah. So I live in Spokane, Washington, which is sort of eastern Washington on the border with Idaho. Have you guys ever been to Spokane? Anybody ever been to Spokane for any reason?
Been to the world.
Yeah, I don't know why you would go.
Why?
It's okay. So I thought I would just talk for a couple minutes about my my own background and how I came to write this book, and then you guys just open the floor to questions. Basically, we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, Beaver related or careers in writing or whatever. So real quick, I mean my background is as an undergraduate in college. I was an English major. After college, I kind of got sick of writing. I felt sort of burned out after working on my undergraduate thesis, which was this really long piece of creative writing, basically. And I spent a few years just kind of traveling around, doing different sort of outdoor jobs. I worked for the National Park Service in Yellowstone, doing invasive fish control, killing trout, basically. I tagged sea turtles in North Carolina. I did urban forestry research in the Bronx, doing all kinds of stuff, trying to figure out what the heck I wanted to do. And eventually I ended up going to grad school to study environmental science, basically thinking I was going to go, be a researcher or work for an environmental nonprofit or something like that, a land trust. And while I was in graduate school, I just sort of rediscovered my passion for writing. I think that one of the hard things as a young writer is you may love to write, but you don't necessarily have something to write about, right? And especially as a young white man, it's not like I had any particularly exceptional life experience. I just didn't know what I wanted to write about, and going to learning about these environmental topics and going to environmental science graduate school helped me realize, here's this fantastic cause of wildlife conservation that I feel really passionately about, and it sort of focused my writing. It gave me an avenue to sort of pour my creative energies into. So I started writing again a lot during graduate school, and after I graduated with a master's in environmental management. Basically, I ended up working as a journalist, covering wildlife conservation and environmental science and restoration ecology and all kinds of different topics. Mostly I moved out to Colorado and worked for a magazine called High Country News, which is basically it's a magazine that covers sort of environmental issues throughout the American West. So I worked for them for a while, and as well as working for them, that I ended up writing a couple of articles about beavers. I think I talked about this in the first chapter of the book, but basically, I met a couple of beaver biologists who sort of opened my eyes to the amazing powers of these animals, wrote a couple articles about this really cool critter, and then a few months after that, this publishing company called Chelsea Green Publishing in Vermont, one of their editors basically was a really big beaver guy himself, and sort of recognized that there's a sort of an increasing amount of interest and attention being paid to the importance of this animal, and he really wanted to do a beaver book, and he basically, scoured the internet looking for people who had written about beavers, and came on my name and basically invited me to write this book. The publishing company didn't have any kind of, they had no input or control in the actual content of the book. They basically said, beavers, go for it, knock yourself out. So, dictating what was in the book was totally up to me. I basically spent, months and months just sending emails and making phone calls, trying to identify the kinds of people and scenes and places and topics that would be part of this book. Then I went on kind of a 6-month-long beaver road trip, basically driving around the country, meeting various, biologists, restoration ecologists, engineers, farmers, ranchers, everybody whose lives intersect with these rodents. I spent a lot of time in the library as well, sort of trying to recreate a lot of what the book's about, as you guys know, is basically trying to think about what the North American landscape looked like, 400 or 500 years ago, right? Before we killed all of these animals, just how many ponds and dams and wetlands had they created? How much had they influenced the landscape? So, a lot of my time was spent basically in libraries, reading old trappers and explorers' journals, trying to get a sense for, how lush and water-covered North America would have been when we had our full contingent of beavers. So that's basically the process. So, the whole thing sort of took, probably took about 2.5 years from, signing the contract and agreeing to write the book to the publication of the book. And about half that was research and half that was just, buckled down writing. The book came out in June of 2018, and since then I've been, sort of promoting the book. There was a kind of a month-long book tour where I just went from, little bookstore to little bookstore all over the East and West coasts. Sometimes 60 people would show up, and sometimes 6 people would show up. You never quite know. Now the book tour is over, and it's been out for about 4 months now, and I'm just trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. So that's where I'm coming from. Basically, I still do lots of freelance writing as well. Writing articles and stories for various publications online and in print. So I'm doing some other writing, promoting the book, and trying to figure out what my next book is going to be right now. So anyway, yeah, that's me, and I'm happy to talk about whatever you guys want.
I asked the students yesterday to come up with a different, can you hear me okay? Just make sure you hear me okay. I asked the students to come up with different questions that were tied to what we're reading, and so I've grouped them into kind of 3 categories. You've actually answered a couple questions already. The first question, and I didn't include students' names with them, so some of you will recognize the question when you get it. So the first section are like beaver questions, so just stuff, general questions about beavers. So one of them is, and this I thought was a really good question, for areas that already have wetlands. I know your book talks about restoring wetlands. For areas that already have wetlands, is there such a thing as too many beavers?
Well, I'm biased, but hell no is what I would say. No, look at, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? If your goal is to return to a completely, natural ecosystem, then I think the answer is no, because we know historically that these ecosystems would have been so dominated by beavers. We know that there's basically nowhere in the country do we have as many beavers as we did before before European arrival. So if the goal is to return to a natural ecosystem, then the answer is no. If the goal is to protect property and roads and farms, well then maybe there are too many beavers. And there are definitely places. There are definitely places where land managers are basically reducing the number of beavers because the beavers don't jive with whatever they're trying to achieve. It was kind of later in the book I talk about Wisconsin. Wisconsin's really interesting because in Wisconsin, they have a couple of fish they really care about that don't do well with beavers around. Beavers are sort of good for fish on a whole, but there are going to be some species that do well and some species that don't do well. So in Wisconsin, they're actually tearing out beaver dams to promote these rare fish that basically don't do super well in the presence of tons of beavers. Some beavers are good. A ton of beavers maybe is not ideal for this particular species, even if it's good for the rest of the ecosystem. So it's all about what you're trying to achieve and what values you're trying to promote.
Okay, thank you. So we're only, I think for later this week, we'll be about 100 pages or so into the book. So we still have a long ways to go. Other than trapping and relocation, what other possibilities exist for dealing with beavers? Obviously, I mean, they're killing, we're not saying killing. What other possibilities are there besides trapping and relocation?
Yeah, so so in the Northeast, there's actually very little trapping and relocation because there are already a lot of beavers, right? So the issue with trying to relocate beavers is that beavers are very territorial. If you just dump a beaver into another beaver's territory, the existing beavers are going to be pissed off and probably kill the beaver that you drop off. So you don't want to, that's kind of the challenge of beaver trapping relocation in the Northeast is that, there's just because a lot of the good habitat is taken, there aren't always a ton of places to stick these guys. That's definitely true in places like, the Adirondacks or the Catskills, these kind of wilder forested areas where, beavers are already pretty dominant on the landscape. So to me, I think better than relocation actually is letting the beavers remain in place. And the way you do that, this is sort of, I get into this in chapter 3, so you guys will read about that this coming week, I guess. But chapter 3 is really about the use of these things called flow devices. And flow devices are basically, they're kind of like these pipe and fence systems. You pass the pipe through the beaver dam or through a road culvert, and the pipe basically drains water, and the fences prevent the beavers from damming up the pipe. So you basically use the pipe to regulate the height of the pond. You can say, hey, I like having beavers here. I appreciate all the great stuff they do for the environment, but I can't. I don't want to be snorkeling through my driveway. And you can use one of these flow devices to basically manage the height of the pond so that it's at a level that's acceptable to both humans and beavers alike. So I think that's really the kind of the future of a lot of beaver management is not necessarily the relocation, because a lot of the beavers that you relocate unfortunately die. It's really letting the beavers stay put while managing the problems that they cause. I think that the use of these kinds of non-lethal flow device techniques are really where it's at going forward.
The last question for this section, you actually just mentioned the future. So one of the other student questions was, obviously you've done a tremendous amount of research and you've been all around, you've done a bunch of things. What part do you think they're going to play in the future? What do you think, what do you see happening 10 and 20 years down the road?
Yeah, I think they're probably just gonna conquer us. They're just gonna dominate Western civilization. And no, I don't know. I think it all depends on on the choices we make. I think that the reason I read this book is because there's this growing interest in the importance of these animals and bringing them back to our landscapes. In the Northeast, in the Northeast, there's already lots of water, right? It's you guys have drought. But it's pretty wet already, right? So beavers still have an important role to play, but they're not essential to securing water supplies. Whereas out west, where I live, it's pretty arid, right? It's really dry. We're constantly in these drought crises, especially now with climate change, right? We're losing a lot of the snowpack and glacial runoff that's so important to keeping water in our rivers and streams. So out west, where water is imperative, and we don't actually have a lot of beavers, we're still missing beavers for most of our streams. So out here, I think that the trajectory is going to be meteoric in the next few years as more and more people sort of recognize how important these animals are to solving our water problems. Out in New England, you guys are already pretty close to fully beavered in lots of places, I would say. Although of course there are beavers returning to New York City. Right? I don't know if you guys read about the beavers in Staten Island this past winter. So there are certainly lots of places in the Northeast, especially in urban areas, where we can stand to have more beavers. but I think they're going to feature most prominently in the future of the American West.
One of the next things that we're doing in class is we're going to be doing a rhetorical analysis essay. So the next couple categories kind of deal with that. So for the students that are here, these are the things that to be paying attention to for sure. One of the student questions was on pages 14 and 15, you have all those locations where you went to and documented in your book. What made you choose those locations?
Yeah, good question. Well, basically, I felt like those were so beavers. I mean, beavers do the same things everywhere, right? Everywhere you go, everywhere you have beavers, they build dams and they create ponds and wetlands. But the impact that those ponds and wetlands have on the environment is different everywhere you go, right? In some places, those ponds are creating really good habitat for fish. In some places, they're helping farmers and ranchers store water to mitigate against drought. In some places, they're creating really good habitat for certain species of birds. I talked about trumpeter swans in the introduction. So that was really what I tried to do in the book was basically go through. I basically talked to a lot of people, read a lot of scientific papers, and said, okay, I want to talk about the different kinds of benefits that beavers provide. What are the different, what's the kind of the spectrum of reasons that we would want these animals back on our landscapes? And I basically went to different sites that would illustrate different concepts. So in California, the stories about beavers and climate change, because of course that's such a climate-stressed place. In Nevada, it's about beavers and ranchers because there are lots of ranchers. In Yellowstone, it's about beavers and wolves because the wolf story in Yellowstone is so famous. In Massachusetts, where there are already lots of beavers, the story is, okay, how can we, in a place that already has plenty of these animals, how can we learn to coexist in a kind of a mutually beneficial way with them? In Wyoming, it's about beavers and sage-grouse, or trumpeter swans, as you guys read. So that was sort of the idea, was basically, what are the different ways these animals benefit the environment, and how can I tell those different stories in a compelling way? Because the thing that I was worried about the whole time as I was writing this book, and I'm sure that you guys have talked about this, is how do you avoid repeating yourself? It's like Jesus Christ, do you read 250 pages about beavers and you're like, enough with these freaking beavers already, That's my biggest fear is that people just get bored halfway through this book reading about, the same kinds of stories. So that was really, to me, that was the most important thing as I wrote this, was how can I tell different kinds of stories about the same animal?